mostly like a very image-heavy presentation. And I'll talk to you a little bit about some work that began, this collaboration with trees, began in my practice here in Missoula, so it really means a lot to come back and think about expanding that here. I'll tell you a bit about the Finland project, a few places where this idea of composing in a visual way began. And my project here, I've been investigating, is there a way to collaborate with these trees on site to compose a set of graphic scores? So not like typical music that you would read in an orchestra or a choir, but something that doesn't require like literacy of that particular notation system, that kind of anyone can jump in and play. And so that's what I've been working on in the 5 weeks or so that we've had so far. Okay, so this is the first thing that I think really changed my art practice. This is around the back of Mount Sentinel. And as a Delawarean, I was like, you can't get a tree like that unless you like cut everything else down. So I started asking around, what the heck is happening to make these sides of the mountain treeless, and these other facets are so much different. And luckily, I happened to meet someone who starved trees of water for research, a professional tree torturer, who was doing a PhD here, Gerard Sapace. And this is his slide, and I showed him a lot. And so he was talking about really what's happening in a tree is there are atmospheres of pressure, but happening negatively. And so the tree is using this negative pressure to pull water up against the force of gravity. And if you have a little bit of a drought, you can have a cell embolize, just like in our bodies we can have an embolism. And that's okay, the water can get around a different way, it's a little less efficient. But if you have too many embolisms, the tree dies. So this tension was really interesting to me. I made a bunch of work about ponderosa pines when I was living here. I got interested in this idea of like, can I make a painting that has a cursor animated? So this one was moving kind of like side to side, and this cursor was moving up and down. And like this idea of this kind of inexorable movement of this line and this like sudden interruption. I was just interested to hand these things off to friends I know who do music compositions and see how they would interpret this. This is kind of the first place this work began. This stuff all exists online if you feel like listening to it, but the talk is too short to really play you any of the sound. But I did bring some headphones, so if you feel like sticking around later, we can share them. And then I got this thing called a MIDI sprout, and now it's like more proprietary, unfortunately, and it's called Plant Wave. And I tried to build one, haven't figured it out yet. But basically it's a galvanometer sensor, so it's picking up on electromagnetic changes in the leaves of a plant, or also on our skin. Or I just had some students in Denver sonify some slime mold with it. So anyway, you can attach these little EEG type pads to your plant or your friend, and then you can put it through a synthesizer, and you can hear theoretically the data of the plant. But I was really interested in this because to be able to hear any of these MIDI signals, there involves like always this process of assigning some subjective sound to the data. So like we're not able to really hear what's happening in the plant without this layer of human decision making. And I think that's really complicated and fascinating. Here's where it was in the studio. We're only playing Stevie Wonder's Secret Life of Plants on loop. And these poor drought-starved seedlings were on a continuous Skype call with themselves. And then I decided I really want to do some of this work in an actual forest. So I was very grateful to be the emerging artist in 2018 for Lincoln Pathways, Blackfoot Sculpture in the Wild. And I got to make this piece. So there are 10 of these housings for a circuit that can sonify basically 3 data inputs about the tree. So there's a photo cell, so changes in light would make the sound of these 10 things go like, or if a cloud passed over. There's a temperature sensor and a wind sensor on these. So I got to spend a month out in Lincoln building these, putting these together. I recorded them. I called this Data After Dark. I recorded them like 8 a.m., 8 p.m., I can't remember, 3 times a day. And Jesse Blumenthal, my friend, came and plugged in some of his DJing things into these, and he was a tree jay. But then, very sadly, I had to leave Missoula. I was very sad about that, as you probably understand. But I got to go to Finland, and this is what it looks like to bring a year's worth of art studio on a plane. Very, very weird experience. I was working at this science center, which is part of Oulu University. And if you're wondering where the heck Oulu, Finland is, I did not know either. It's here about halfway north in the country. It's a 3-hour train ride south of the Arctic Circle. So just to set the scene, this is what it looks like in the warm season. And like, you've picked huckleberries, but can you imagine having so many blueberries? They just have this scoopy thing. They just like take through the bushes. Amazing. And that's their local mushrooms at my research host summer cottage. Everybody has a summer cottage, but they don't have running water or anything. It's wonderful. You would love it. And then in the winter, we had this floating houseboat that the Finns made into a sauna. And so you could go into this sauna, and when you heat it up enough, you could do this, which is really amazing. So I went there. I was curious about plants that could survive a more extreme climate than we have here. And I was studying sphagnum moss that creates peatlands. This is one of the conserved peat sites. And only the top part of it is alive. The rest is hummifying gradually, like forming this mat. It can make its own artificial water table, like really fascinating, fun like pillow thing to walk on. If you zoom in further, I got to use this really fancy microscope. These are the cells that can hold 20 times the plant's weight in water. And so it makes this waterlogged environment where nothing can break down. You have like this pollen record that's kind of perfectly preserved, the bog bodies you've probably heard of. And I just, I thought it's so interesting because just like us, it's engineering this environment where only it can do really well. So if you're like a little shrub trying to grow and you get too heavy, you'll drown yourself in this. Pretty wild. So it's like a good guy and a bad guy, kind of. And then, of course, it stores carbon, so we have to take it. And this is what our research site looked like. So you can see where the water was drained, and then a truckload of this comes into town every 10 minutes in the winter. And that provides heating and electricity for this 300,000 person town. And when you take it away, what's left is this really acidic soil where not much will grow, and you can see we got to fly a drone at work. You can see this sort of like scraped bare land, and then these are our plots. I say our plots loosely because my coworkers have been doing this study for 10 or 15 years, and I just came in at the very end. But they were testing out different potential remedies, like maybe change the acidity of the soil, and some of them worked pretty well. So I was going to make some art about this, and I got to use this hyperspectral camera, which is another thing I didn't know about until I got there. And instead of a typical image that you get from a camera, it gives you a data cube. So you have all of this z-axis of pixels that you can't see. So this is what we can see, and then all of these other wavelengths tell you things about cell health and contents and water, how much water the soil is holding. So I started thinking, okay, if we can't see them, can we hear them? This is our soil sample, one of them. And then here it is. I got to learn this new software for analyzing this stuff, and for some reason it was half in English and half in Finnish. It was a real challenge. And then if you select one pixel, you get a little graph like this. And so I compiled a bunch of these and traced them onto this kind of familiar staff paper. And I have the fertilized core sample where we added some peat ash back in, so it's less acidic, and the control, as we're kind of expecting to see more water content up here. They're the little, like, if you remember, the little breath marks in your sheet music, if you ever were in choir. That's where there was no reflectance, and so like aeration in the soil, I thought. And then tempo and dynamics are all determined by water temperature and level. And I was like, there's aeration in here. I would love for humans to sing this. So I brought it to my host. She also is in a choir. I brought it to the choir director of a Finnish choir, and he was like, we can't work with that. Come back when you have something normal. So I sent it, but I did. But I sent it to my friend Dan Townsend, who does some electronic compositions. So come back to that. Then I was going to make a quilt. And this is my office in Finland. These are all the plants that we're growing in this novel ecosystem that we have totally changed. The peat won't regrow. So these are kind of the new residents. And I boiled these for about 4 hours. Very technical process of stomping them to get the fibers apart. Made some paper. 36 sheets of this became the quilt, and I projected, this is a map of the tracts of land that were extracted. So I started embroidering those, kind of filling them back in, thinking about all of this handwork as some analog for the labor of this moss plant. Attached speakers to this paper made from the plants on site, and you could hear Dan's music composition based on the weird score from the hyperspectral data of the soil sample. So that was this really fun, like, multi-year piece to make. But I still wanted the coral piece. So I got an alumni grant, and I brought on a collaborator, Hannah, so we worked again with Fulbright Finland. Here she is kind of in the process of mapping all of this onto something more normal. And here's just one of the pages of music that she came up with. It's 160 years of soil data, I think. And she worked with this choir, like they found a Finnish poem about swamplands, and she worked with them to kind of understand how the syllables should work on the different notes. This is the choir. They're phenomenal. And I got to go back for one of their rehearsals of this piece. And they performed it at New Music October. There's 3 Finnish words in this presentation. And there's a video piece that goes with it. So this is the stereo microscope image. That's what you would see during the concert. But the pixels get totally rearranged. And I collaborated with a programmer, Brian Gibbons, who wrote this code in processing a visual coding language. And he was taking this hyperspectral core image as the seed image, and I love that. That's the computer word for what's happening. And so we can't ever see that, but the order of those pixels are changing the order of the pixels you see. And that's one tiny fraction of what he did. And so we get this like beautiful sort of like grains of pollen thing that slowly coalesces into the image that's more understandable to us. These are a little hard to see, I'm sorry. And there's my research host, who's also a singer and a natural dyer. And here we are heading into the area of reindeer husbandry. This is what the site looks like now. Collecting some CO2 data. That's the next thing. I don't know what it will be, but something about the ground breathing. And then I think I'm talking about 2 more pieces that come before this one. So one of them is probably a 5-year project at this point that began in 2019 when I just started my time in Finland. We went up to Kilpisjärvi, and so the Finns say that their country is like a dancing woman, and Russia took her one arm. So this is the other arm. And Kilpisjärvi is at the very top of that arm, so you can easily walk into Norway and Sweden and come back into Finland. And we had a bunch of art science people at kind of like an adult camp, and we would go do our work and come back to this sauna and swim in this lake. And one night, this actually happened. This is what was overhead while I was swimming in the lake. You can't make it up. So I was on a team called HAB, which stands for High Altitude Bioprospecting. And we had artists working in a range of media. We had an engineer, a biologist, a very exciting group of people to meet. And we were all interested in like making contact with microbes that could live in the air over the Arctic. We're also interested in this idea of bioprospecting as this sort of like weird extractive colonial word, and thinking about like what is the agency of these microbes. Here are some of the questions that we were thinking about. Here's all of our stuff that we brought. A table of stuff, and we had to haul this helium canister up to this Arctic fell, and to fill up this helium-filled kite balloon. So that's what it looks like inflated, and we sent it up in the air a bunch of times that week, and we had cameras attached to it, microphones, photo paper, all sorts of experiments. It's very serious research, flying a kite. I recommend it. And I just have a bunch of beautiful photos for you of northern Finland in September. Here are drawings made by the tether line of the kite. And then here's our more science-y experiment. So we sent these wind socks up and deflated it. We put the wind socks onto petri dishes, let them grow for a bit. My friend took them across an international border. It was fine. And did PCR on them. And we were able to identify some of them. Some of the folks we found in the air. One of them was first isolated in Antarctica. That is that one. Interestingly, I didn't find a lot of images of some of these, so it's like maybe the science folks aren't so interested in what the microbes look like. I don't know. But we were using drawing as this process of getting to know, like, what do they look like, who are they? Planted these drawings. Everybody's kind of home, and this is like the spring of 2020 time. Everyone's in their separate places. But we sent all of these, and my collaborator digitally kind of stitched them together, like another quilt kind of, and sent it to this weaving mill in Finland, and this jacquard loom. I'm like really interested in this, like sort of the first computer, because it uses this punch card. And that's what we made. And it's this 8-meter tall weaving of all of these microbes that we came in contact with. And we called this piece kangas. That's the Finnish word for forest, like the type of forest, but it's also the word for fabric. And I love this because it's like thinking of the forest ecosystem as this like entanglement. The exhibition are wind socks. They're copper on the outside because it's antimicrobial, so we're hoping we would eliminate some contamination. Some postcards to the microbes. Some kites, familiar to the folks who went to Eleanor's workshop. Okay, and then I moved to Oklahoma for my first teaching job. And I joined this soil dialogues group that was part of Eco Art Space, which is this international group of artists. We met about monthly for probably 3 years planning this. And then we finally met in real life in Florence, Italy. I can't believe it happens. So we presented this work at a soil conference, and what we were all doing was burying fabric at our sites, and we had a grant to send a sample of that soil to a lab in Texas and tell us who's living there. And there were over 700 types of bacteria and fungi living in like my tiny little soil sample from here. And so I was really interested in this region as this crossing. They call it cross timbers because the trees kind of grow like this a little bit, but also because it's the meeting of this like eastern, more forested ecosystem type and this more western prairie type. And that's what it looks like on the ground. It's not flat. Like Oklahoma is not as flat as I thought. A lot of like kind of ribbony roads. Here are some of the plants that live there. And here's where I buried my fabric samples. That's what they look like coming up. So I had them in the ground for about a month, just very shallowly in the ground. And here's one that almost completely decomposed. Like there's no way to get even a whole piece out of it. And here are what some of the pieces look like when they're still in their little balls. And then I have some video of the unwrapping. Very satisfying. So it's like a citizen science technique. You can see how much microbial activity is happening. Here's another one. So everyone did this in their separate places. And then with our info from the lab, I started responding to the marks already made on these canvases. And then I made these stencils of the folks who are living there, and started kind of layering this stuff into some paintings. And I wanted these paintings to get animated, and then again play with graphic notation. Like, could these microbe forms be sonified somehow? So I worked with another collaborator, Sherry Feldman, and we went back and forth with. Don't feel like you need to read this, but a lot of information about like the shape of, this is all of the microbes that we found. This is a scroll. It's amazing what's living in the soil. So for example, like a spherical bacterium, like a coccus, could be like a round sound, like a whoa, whoa, whoa kind of thing. Or like some move in a corkscrew shape, and so like could the sound kind of do this. So I came up with a bunch of these pages for each of the kind of top 30 that we found the most. And here's what one of the final paintings looks like. And then I don't think this is loud enough for you to really hear it. I love the collaborations because you just have no idea what someone else is going to interpret. And like the soil laughing, I love it. So here's where we presented in our conference at a palazzo. We have to do things better in America. And then here's the art show. We brought it in our suitcases and we showed it at this it's this artist studio space and a coffee shop in the morning and a pizza restaurant at night called Il Conventino. It used to be a convent. And here are a couple images from that art show. And then that brings us to here. So hopefully I haven't taken too long getting to today. Our graphic scores. Moving into the studio. Thanks, Katie, wherever you went, for this amazing library about orcharding that's really driven a lot of this work. So the first thing I did was I did more of that fabric varying. So those pieces are under 40 of these trees, and if you walk around you'll see a little red string marking where they are, and they'll come out in about a week. So I don't know what they look like yet, or what I'll do with them yet. And then, so then I made a set of these songs, and I'm using that word really loosely, and I haven't really worked this way before, so I'm really grateful for this chance to play with a new kind of format. So in between two storms, on the week of June 9th, I tied this paintbrush to a tree, and this is kind of what happened. So thinking about the tree as an agent who collaborates in making marks. And also, don't feel like you need to read this, but there's text like this that accompanies each of the scores that will talk about like who could play it, about how long should it be, how the score was made, and some instructions. And the instructions come from a sound philosopher, Pauline Oliveros. I mean, I made them kind of in response to her ideas. And so she has this idea of the drone as like this single sound. Like if you keep making the single sound, all of these little variations start emerging. So if you're willing to be kind of patient and still and wait for like being able to hear those, then there's a lot that can unfold. So that was my instruction for whoever performs this piece. It's like maintain this single pitch, thinking of the tree as this being as all of these different air masses are passing over it in the storm. And it's just that's it. Those are the images that they can interpret. And this little at the end, I love it. Then the wound song. So Katie shared with me this incredible tree pruning book, because we were having a conversation, I think on my first day here, where I asked, do trees like being pruned? And I really started to think, like, I had thought of the orchard as this being that's made up of multiple beings, and thinking of, like, our bodies are that way too with all of our microbial community. But thinking about our relationship with the tree as this kind of unfolding, not a being exactly, like how to show that relationship. And so one of the things that Alex Shigo, who wrote this like a long time ago, but has all of this language that kind of looks at the similarity between a tree body and a human body. One of the things he talks about is that a tree stands in place, he says, for a long time and withstands many wounds. And the tree can't move away from anything that's wounding it. It can't heal a cell like we can. It can only compartmentalize. And it's kind of funny thinking about like how humans sometimes try to compartmentalize. The tree does compartmentalize, or tries to, and then it can build new growth in a new area. So it can't really like fix something that's gone wrong in that same place. And here's some of the, pardon the cell phone pictures that I took up here. but the actual compartments that you can see from his book, and then some of those on trees here. And so I started drawing and painting those, and I came up with, this is one of these pieces dealing with this idea of wounding. And so the idea, the instructions for performers here, there would be one per wound, and they would perform based on kind of the size and the character, changing the length of their performance of this wounding. And then the instructions are, when you kind of reach the end of your wound, you drop out, like you don't make any more noise. Just like the tree can't really do anything more with that spot. And then I asked them to take 10 breaths of silence, like hold silence for 10 breaths, and move to a different spot, and then they can pick a new wound. And the piece ends when there's silence. So I don't know how long it will take. And here it is out here. Up there is my studio at the top of the hill. It's amazing. And then the collar song. So where you prune a tree, if you prune it before you get to this collar, that's good. And here's basically what that looks like. It's this like complicated sort of cross-hatching, like tissues moving in different directions and doing different things. This sort of like armor area where the branch is connecting to the trunk. And so you don't want to cut any of that off, because all of this complicated stuff happens here where the tree can start to protect itself after you cut this limb off. Here are what some of them look like here. And I again started drawing a lot of these, and if you want, can I pass you around some things? This one is really cool because like the photos don't get all the color changes that are happening. So I started drawing and painting all of these that I could fit from one tree. Here's kind of what it looks like in the studio. I'm interested in these sort of fluorescent electric colors because I don't know, because they're unnatural. I'm thinking about like how it can talk about all of the things that are happening, the processes in the tree that we're not always able to sense because they're hidden or at a different time scale from us. And so the instructions for the performers here are to think of like closing this wound with your sound. I know it's really abstract sounding, but I think it'll be cool. And I had a lot of fun photographing this because it's just so different in different light. Okay, and then the pruning song. This one, I'm still kind of wrapping my head around how I want this to go. But what I did is I went to the seedling tree by the tin shed and the outhouse. And I started making a map of all of the pruning sites that I could reach. And there are a lot. Like, so many. And I thought this was just like a diagram that I would use to make something later, but I'm starting to really just think maybe this is the thing. So there's a pruning site, a wound made on a tree, maybe for the good of the tree, because like Shigo was saying, we've taken the tree out of its natural forest environment now, and so we have to kind of do some things to help it adjust to this human space. And then there are arrows for where the rest of the growth goes, and these squiggly arrows for the shoots. So apparently if a tree is sending off these shoots, it's like a distress signal. It's like, I need more stuff. So there are a lot of these, and I don't know what I'll do with them yet. And then I'll get back to the regularly scheduled programming here. So that's kind of what it was looking like. Here I started thinking, like, could I notate them in some kind of more regular mathematical way? I made some ink with the orchard, so I started thinking maybe I would paint them. If you want, I can pass this around, and if you want to smell it, it smells kind of good and weird. It's based on this ancient iron gall ink recipe. So it uses ferrous sulfate iron salt, and it reacts to tannic acid, so it's really easy to make.
Smells great.
Yeah. Just don't drink it because it has a lot of iron in it. And this is kind of where I am right now, using that ink. I don't know where that'll go. That's okay. Another in progress one is the ripening song. So since I've been here, there are all of these little apples that are getting less little every day. And so I started trying to kind of record as many of them as I could, walking down the hill from my studio to about here, and then going back and doing that same thing the next week. And then I made a bunch of tiny screenshots of these large scans and animated them together. And it's really like quick and kind of rough hewn, and like, I don't know, this seemed like a very kind of fast process for a tree. And then the last part of what I'll show you is like really slow. So I think we were talking about that in the studio visit. Kind of interested in that pacing. So the instructions for the musician, or maybe the dancer, would be to somehow convey this idea of ripening, becoming rounder, like changing from starchy to more sugary. Like, how could that be conveyed? Okay, then, this is the sound person I'm thinking about. And she has this idea about listening, like in quantum physics, when you observe a particle, things change. She's saying that by listening, you change the sound. And like, it kind of makes sense. If you stand in front of a speaker, your body is changing the sound waves. But I think she's also getting at it in other ways. I'm sure it changes us to listen to things, but does it change the sound? So anyway, I could talk about that for longer, but I got to use a contact microphone. So there's me under the tree. Here's the contact microphone. It's a little hard to see. I have a lot more photos on the next slide. And then my little recorder. So it's like a little disc, and you can strap it to the surface of a tree. Oh, you know, you can mostly see the orange thing. It's a little circle. And you can hear what's happening kind of resonating through the body of the tree. And so I started playing with these sounds. And you won't be able to really hear it, but these are on YouTube now. And here are all the instructions, right? And then I made these videos with my camera also contacting the tree. This idea of like, what are we able to sense when we're like directly touching something? And for the phone camera, it's like less, which I really loved. For the tree, it wasn't even actually as dramatic as I kind of hoped it would be. Mostly you were able to hear if there's a gust of wind, and two branches kind of do this. You can hear that in this really kind of like beautiful distorted way, like you're hearing it through this whole network. But I couldn't hear any of like the water pumping, cells embolizing stuff. And maybe it's possible to hear it and there was too much other louder things. I'm not sure. So anyway, these ask audiences or performers to view this outside of the orchard space, so kind of making a virtual orchard. And then there are a bunch of sounds that you can only hear with headphones. Like if you listen to this later, if you feel like listening to some strange things later, you definitely can't hear it from like these speakers very well. And asks them to reinforce the sounds that they hear. So not just to copy them or imitate them, but maybe like hold one of those sounds longer, or think of like some tone that would pair with that sound and strengthen it. You can kind of hear a little.
Over that bird?
Yeah. So I have these if you feel like listening, and they're each maybe like 2 minutes, so not super long. But then I started thinking about all of the stuff that's happening in a tree that this microphone can't pick up. And that's where this next song comes from. So I was thinking about contact, and I made some rubbings on the tree with the very fancy, like old printer photo paper, like from your home printer, and you're printing out your little memory. That's not fancy. But it was what worked best. So charcoal, and the texture of the tree, and then the charcoal just came right off, but what was left was this like strange bronzy imprint. And it looks like this, and it's kind of like too low contrast to see, so it was perfect for the too quiet to hear song. And so here's this piece. And so the instructions are, basically I'm asking people to think about and imagine the sound of a bunch of processes of the tree, like lifting up water, like reaching out with your roots, like forming new cells, like what are the things that you can't hear, and what could they sound like? And then this is. So that goes for a while. I'm gonna not subject you to all of this. And then the fences out here. So we have so many. They're so beautiful, and they really started to look like music to me. So just this like kind of funny grid that we like to impose as humans. This like boundary between what's in the orchard, what's in the homestead, what's outside. Where people are allowed to go, like even the ground started to seem like a fence, like what's above and below ground. So if you get a contact microphone, putting it on a fence is way more dramatic than putting it on a tree. So there's like yards of this resonant metal. So there's some really weird stuff, and like if you have a little piece of grass like touching the metal of the fence way down there, you'll hear it all the way up here. So I have some really cool sounds from this. And I asked people in this one to think about being a tree in this field for 17 minutes. and that's kind of like what a day has been like up here. So kind of beautiful, kind of strange. And then we have the dump. And that was like in the background of everything was just like this like little peeping and like sounds from echoing from down there. And it's like the most beautiful. I never noticed this dump when I lived here, but we have the most beautiful dump in Missoula, I think probably. And then, sorry, this is a lot of text, but there was this really beautiful passage at the end of the application for becoming part of the Register of Historic Places, talking about this interstate and this dump as like these visual symbols of the forces that caused the kind of end of this homestead existing as like something other than a historical or kind of interactive site like it is now. So I thought that was really interesting, and it got me thinking about like, could we imagine the sounds of this place looking backwards as it was in the past? And then this is from the Butterflies and Railroad Ties book. This idea of imagined sound is one that Oliveros was thinking about. So we have the dump song. and if you want, you can also spend 8 minutes watching the dump. And so for the first 3 minutes, I have this beautiful audio that's like this, and in the background, you can hear it. In the daytime, you can probably hear more actual dumping of things. And then it's silent, and I ask people to think about what would it have sounded like when the trees were in their infancy, 130, 140 years ago. And then I asked them to spend the last 2 minutes thinking about this land before homesteading and before colonization. So that's that piece. And then it gets a little weirder still. So there are these piles of iron things around, and I started drawing them on Yupo paper. So it's polypropylene plastic paper. And this was on purpose because my good friend was running an iron port, and I was like, I'm going to pour iron on this stack of drawings about the stack of iron things, and the plastic paper won't melt. And so here's the pile of the drawings of the things in the pile. And we made this mold for it. And then here's an iron pour a couple weeks ago on the UM campus. And this was all really interesting to me. Like, I've done these iron pours in grad school, and I love them because you can't do it by yourself. And so this sort of like communal aspect is great. This like huge transition in form from a solid metal that's like, as you know it, to this glowing liquid is amazing. And then there's something about the idea of how this homestead operates with reusing things and repurposing things creatively, that like all of this iron came from radiators and bathtubs that the UM students broke up with a sledgehammer. Thank you to them. I did that once. And then here, after it cooled, had a little excavation. Some of it was poured in this like tub of sand, and some was in this mold that I got to break apart. And some I can pass around to you if you want. It's like, I don't think it's really that fragile. It's a little fragile. This is the lightest one, and it's got the layers of the plastic paper. And then this one has, and it's got like this weird sort of conglomerate soil stuff on it too. This one has the paper inside of it also.
When you say soil stuff, what's the stuff?
Like gravel and some like residue of the silica molds. But it won't be dangerous. This one has more iron. I mean, don't eat it. This one's a little sharp. I'll let you get up if you want to. Here's another little, anyway, it'll be up here. And this is the most dramatic one that I got, that has no iron attached to it, but there's still like the lines that I made, and this stack of paper, like you can see the other layer through, and then the plastic melted. And the people at the iron pour, like, this is not normal for an iron pour, even one of Jesse's iron pours. So one of them was like, good luck with your bubble gum. So I don't know what I'll make out of these, but something for this project. And I'll just end with the stuff from the workshop that happened here 2 weeks ago. So we had about, 12 people who braved, we had every kind of weather in about 2 hours. So thank you to them. And we did improvisations with the trees. So the first exercise was this painting with trees. And people, this is one thing I love about teaching is, like, for some reason I never would have thought of doing that. And so people just come up with amazing things, like this duet painting. Some of the results of that. The next prompt was to sit near a tree facing away from the wind. So you and the tree are kind of in this together with the wind at your backs, and to draw the character of the wind, like how fast it is, how heavy it is, as you're breathing out, so also thinking about your breath as the wind. And here are some of those records, wind drawings from the orchard. Another exercise was this partner piece. So one person was contacting the tree and drawing what they felt, and then the other person was holding this clipboard for them. And for some reason that, like, doing it together seems like somehow part of this, the way the trees are growing together. Okay, and then the last piece, we ate an apple, and for each bite of the apple we made a measure of a music composition. So you could draw this any way you wanted. Here are some of the ways that people drew eating an apple. There's a lot of, like, the initial crunch, and then all the chewing. Everyone has that in some different way. Like here it's like a crunch and then chew. And then we performed it in the orchard with kazoos. So trying to make it like a little less, sometimes performing can be nerve-wracking. So anyway, thank you for the kazoo performers for humoring me. And that's it. If you want to watch any of this, if you want to spend 17 minutes looking at the field, it's on YouTube. And then here's my studio visitor. He came by every day, but I think he was here for the snacks. It's a deer. Yeah. Okay. And if you have any...